Yeah, nothing too crazy in that way. But I think infiltration is just such a huge part of building load. That's a big piece. People don't quite understand or appreciate what a big deal infiltration is. When it's 0 degrees outside and that wind's blowing, that's the load.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Mark Jussaume, an engineer with the SmithGroup in Boston, Massachusetts. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Well, I introduced you as an engineer there. You run the place. Am I right about that, Mark? Can you tell me what you do there?
So I'm the office director. So I oversee kind of the Boston office of SmithGroup. We're a national firm, so we have 1,200 people, 14 major offices and some smaller offices as well. And while my background's in engineering, I haven't done actual engineering other than the work I did in my own house for quite a while. Yeah.
You manage people to do engineering.
In architecture. So we have, the staff we have in Boston, we have about 100 people. So we're architects, engineers, interior designers, specializing mainly in institutional work. So we do higher ed, we do science and tech, we do a lot of work within healthcare, we do some workplace. Those are kind of the areas that we focus on. So it tends to be largely institutional, so it's large commercial type work, mainly from our location.
How did you come to work there? And I'm guessing you didn't start out as director at the office. Did you do?
No, no, that would have been a leap. My background's in, I got trained in engineering. I went to Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston, so I got trained in engineering. It's interesting because the building trades are not something that generally people go to school for, at least within engineering. Architecture is a bit different. But in engineering, it's mechanical engineering is a pretty broad kind of field. So Wentworth itself had a co-op program, so you actually go to work, sort of like an internship between semesters. And so I got to try a bunch of different things. And one of the things I got to try was a small consulting firm that was doing building engineering, mechanical systems. I was doing HVAC, and I really liked it. I really thought it was an interesting field, so I ended up getting hired by the firm that I had interned with, got started in the field, and it happened that had several jobs. The second or third job, the firm started to specialize in healthcare, so that became more of a focus for me. Joined the firm that I'm with now, that was 31 years ago. I started the engineering group for them. So they were mainly an architectural firm looking to add engineering to the portfolio of services that they were offering. So I started with a handful of people, took over the group, grew the size of that. From there, I went into operations. So I became the COO for the firm. Eventually, I was CEO for the firm. And then more recently, 3 years ago, we did an acquisition where we actually got acquired by SmithGroup and become part of a much larger organization, which is part of our own kind of growth strategy, created opportunity for people, more access to more high quality work and clients, and it's been terrific for us.
Do you feel like your engineering program at school prepared you for the work you did when you got out? Were you ready to be an engineer?
No, that's kind of funny because you get trained in a lot of things in school that's very theoretical, and you're not quite as prepared as you think you might be. Because my experience, I remember getting the first job I got thinking to myself, it's there is no way on earth I should be doing this work. Somebody should be watching that too. I probably was a little more prepared than I might have imagined, but there's a lot to learn once you get out. It's there's the theoretical and then there's the real world. And I think, a lot of our learning, what we do in buildings, comes from actually being on the job site, watching the contractors. One of the big mistakes I made on that first job I worked on is I remember put a pump that probably should have been mounted on the floor inline. And it was the biggest inline pump that you might actually select. That's a hard thing to service when you put it up in the air like that.
Were those guys giving you a hard time when they would see you on the site?
I think they saw the look in my eyes when I showed up to the job site and saw that massive pump up in the air, and I thought, like, oh,
Sorry, guys.
that wasn't a wise decision, but it worked out. But you do learn a lot. I mean, it's like, it's only in the seeing, turning the theoretical into the practical, is a lot about kind of seeing it get built, working side by side with the contractors, really understanding what it takes to put a job together. That's so key. I mean, our people get out in the field a lot. They get that experience.
I think you'd agree. Making mistakes helps you learn too, but it's an expensive way to learn. But I don't know of anyone who would contradict me on that.
Absolutely. We're constantly kind of learning and training people. I mean, we do have a lot of experienced people, so their job is to make sure that we're not, making big mistakes out in the field. But I think a lot of it is very iterative, right? I mean, we're always kind of getting better at what we do. There isn't one way. Materials are changing, technology changes, and staying on top of that. I mean, it's challenging, and that's where like our focus helps, because we're not trying to be all things to all people. I mean, we're really kind of niched in what we're trying to do. So, we understand complex buildings as well as anyone else. So especially things like healthcare, very code driven. There's a lot of knowledge that you need around kind of how the building works, the way they use certain spaces, pressure relationships when it comes to engineering. So, those are key to what it looks like to do the job right. And if you're trying to move between various specialties, you're not going to be familiar with that. It's too much to know.
I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask for the benefit of our listeners. But I would imagine your phone has been ringing off the hook from healthcare providers who are worried about how to improve their air quality. Is that right?
We've done a lot of work since the pandemic and assisting clients around exactly that. I mean, controlling air quality, ventilation, pressure relationships, understanding how they can make accommodations. I mean, the big influx of patients was a big problem. So there was a lot of temporary facilities built. We helped out with some of that. We've across the country, not just here locally, and we really felt a big need, which we were able to help and respond to for all of our clients. That's sustained itself even through now.
We met because you sent the FHB podcast photos of your basement spiral ductwork, and I'm sure folks who listen to both shows will remember that conversation. You were talking about how you like it because it works. It's got good air delivery, keeping it inside the conditioned space and exposed to something commercial spaces do a lot. You apparently feel like I do that that's a very cool product that has some space, and it should have some space in the residential sector. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, what we were able to do, we built a new home. So I've been here about a year. And so it was a couple of years ago where I got heavily involved in the design, all of the details, including especially the HVAC. And we knew we were going to do a finished basement. So basements are challenging. They start to think about running ductwork in a basement. Everyone tries to enclose them in soffits, and that tends to cut into the headroom. It gets kind of messy. How do you get around the center beam and all of those kind of things? So I thought, it's like, why not go for kind of more an exposed look? So we did use the spiral. Originally, I had it as flat oval, which is just spiral, which is basically kind of compressed. That's hard to find, so that didn't work out. So I did go with the spiral. But I think, it's gave it a kind of a nice, you might see this in many restaurants, where people just expose it. You don't insulate it. Being in the finished basement and even in the unfinished basement, all of that is conditioned space. So it didn't actually need to be insulated, which is kind of nice. It keeps it clean. That worked out really well. I mean, I ran the branches between the joist space, ran the mains just along the center beam, and just left them exposed. One of the things I didn't count on was the leakage, right? Because it's not actually sealed, which can be really kind of messy when you seal it with the appropriate kind of sealing material. And so I've had to go back and seal some of the joints just to minimize the leakage, because what I found was the load in the basement is so low. It's fully insulated basement. It's insulated under slab, insulated in the walls with closed cell. And it's basically a big thermos. So there just isn't much load down there. So it doesn't take too much leakage before it's getting cooler than you want it or warmer than you want it. But a little bit of sealing helped take care of that.
You and I talked a little bit about this, but did you find it difficult to work or to find a contractor who would work with an engineer on their own house? I bet that was a little intimidating for them.
It is a little scary. I think, fortunately, we did find a really good contractor. I think he did a great job. I was really impressed with him. Not only was there was that concern, but also he was somewhat unfamiliar with the equipment that I was using. I used Lennox equipment in the house. That wasn't a product that he was just very familiar with. On top of that, it was a pretty sophisticated system as HVAC goes, because we had variable volume, variable capacity.
Multiple zones. Yeah, zones.
There's a zone damper in every branch duct. So there's like 16, 17 zone dampers that make up 4 zones. So when you put all that level of complexity, and then you get someone who cares so much, for a contractor, it's a bit intimidating. But I have to say, he did a great job. He really paid attention to the details. We worked together closely. He was a little fearful. I supplied the equipment. Because of the connections in the industry, I was able to pre-purchase the equipment. So I got exactly what I wanted. And he was a little fearful around someone else supplying the equipment, because that can create challenges if the equipment doesn't perform. As it turns out, when he went to turn on the air-cooled condenser, the compressor, it didn't work, which was a nightmare. And he called me right away to say, this is why I don't do. The manufacturer was great. They showed up. As it turns out, the compressor was bad, and they changed it out, and it was fine after that. But what he did really good.
Can I ask you? Does that happen in your day job? I mean, like, it doesn't happen, right? This stuff just works.
Brand new. It's tested at the factory. I don't know how that happened, but it did. Maybe it was in transportation. I don't know. But they fixed it and they responded. What I thought might be a lot of work that the contractor may not follow through on was getting familiar with the system, getting it up and operational, because there is a control panel, all of those zones, variable volume. So you've got the compressor that's varying speed, you've got the condenser fan that's varying speed, you've got the fan unit that's varying in speed. There's a lot of things, kind of moving parts. I mean, it all just needs to be wired, but then there's the whole commissioning and getting it up and running. So I was really surprised when I came in and he had read the instruction manuals from front to back, which was impressive to me. Mm-hmm. And he had all set it all up and had it running. I mean, I've been commissioning the system for the last year. I mean, I live here. It's kind of my experiment. So I get to tweak it. So I'm constantly
does it
adjusting.
Need like seasonal tweaks, based on stack effect stuff? Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, what I've been doing, I can modulate, the amount of CFM that's running to, the air quantities to each zone. I can play with the temperatures and those kind of things. So
I bet this drives your wife nuts.
It could. It does. But what's nice is it's very quiet. It's a little oversized. That's the other thing with, designing your own system. It's like, you want to be careful not to be too conservative on these kind of things, because that's people's nature. Is like, you never want to not have enough cooling or not enough heating, especially the cooling side. As it turns out, my system's probably 30% larger than it needs to be, but I really wasn't concerned about that, because I knew with the variable speed and capacity, it's only going to run as much as it needs to run. So the benefit of that is it runs at a slower speed, it's a little quieter, and you still get the performance and the energy efficiency. So, there's no real downside to that other than the first cost, which, I was willing to invest. I mean, it's a more sophisticated system than what many homeowners are putting in. Sure. But I think it's kind of where the industry is headed. I think, people are much more sensitive to indoor air quality, operating costs, longevity. When you're building a home that you're actually going to stay in, and it's not kind of something that you're going to flip, you want to do something that you can be, feel good about, the way it runs and the serviceability and the quality and the performance.
You mentioned quiet to me too, which I think is probably, for me, would be one of the best selling points, Yeah,
I think, so many systems, they go in and I don't know, a lot of it's around ductwork. It's like getting the ductwork so that I always kind of think about it as you want to be somewhat self-balancing. It's like when you have to go in and you have to make a lot of adjustments because you have the path of least resistance. If the ductwork is sized equally in the distribution and you're not kind of doing things to make it somewhat self-balancing, and you have to do a lot of balancing at the outlets, you get a lot of noise. I think we talked about this before. The outlet dampers that most people put in they're just a recipe for for noise because you have to shut them so far to get them to work. So I actually put volume dampers back at the branches.
So we should explain to folks a couple things. So that's a damper that's within the branch duct, right? It's like a flapper, right. And you can tweak it to a slow or allow more airflow, right?
Exactly. So it's much more effective. It really allows you to kind of deal with the noise that the grill damper would make. You're not going to get that. And, you can really kind of get the system performance you need it. I mean, living here, I've made adjustments over time as I see one room, even with the 4 zones, you get some differential where you can just make a tweak here or there and it just further improves things. And it's because it's running at a reduced speed, it's very quiet. Not only is it quiet inside, it's quiet outside as well because the condenser itself, the fan on the condenser and the compressor, which are generally something that's pretty loud, it's going to sit outside the house somewhere, but it's usually probably near a bedroom window or something like that. You don't even hear it. And it's at reduced speed, it's amazing how much quieter the equipment can get. The other thing I did was I did aero seal on the exterior, the aero barrier.
On your building envelope, yeah.
On the building envelope, which I think made a huge difference. I mean, the building itself went from the original blower door test was up at like 6 air changes, 7 air changes. I mean, there were a few holes which they needed to fill in. But as they started to inject the material into the building envelope, I mean, I went down under 1 air change, and that has made a world of difference in the heating and the cooling loads. The building is super quiet. It's amazing how quiet it is. You don't hear outside noise like you would. I had a previous house to this that wasn't an old house, but it wasn't a tight house. Big difference.
And I think, you stuck with pretty mainstream stuff in your build. You have normal windows, right? You didn't do anything exotic.
No, it's traditional. It's code. I mean, it's 6-inch walls, fiberglass, nothing too crazy. Double pane glass. Nothing too crazy in that way. But I think infiltration is just such a huge part of building load. That's a big piece. People don't quite understand or appreciate what a big deal infiltration is. When it's 0 degrees outside and that wind's blowing, I mean, that's the load, right? I mean, you get transmission load, but it's the infiltration that'll really kind of make the difference. If your building's tight, world of difference, much more comfortable.
We talk a lot on the show about how it's difficult to find skilled HVAC techs who do, realistic manual J load calculation and install ductwork with, smooth airflow and sealed. And why do you think it's so hard to find technicians in the residential side? I bet it's a little better in the, institutional world where you work, but why are they so poorly trained?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of emphasis. I mean, so much of it is rule of thumb, where people look at a square footage, modern house versus an older house, and they come up with a number, and that gives them how many tons they need and how much air they need, and they tend to want to go with that. And I think there's the conservative nature is also don't want to get a call back, right? You don't want to get too close to kind of what that building load might be, because not only maybe that's enough to keep up with what the load might be, but people also want it to come up to temperature quickly, right? So there's those kind of factors as well. And, there's it does take a little more work for sure to kind of do a good load calculation and really understand that. It's not that hard, but I think it just takes time and money, and people are looking for speed and low cost, and they just want to kind of get it done and don't want to get that call back. So I don't think it invites a level of sophistication. I think that is changing. Codes are trying to push it that way for sure. The building inspectors, they're challenging these kind of things. There's codes that are put in place to help kind of manage some of that, to make sure that it's not oversized. But there's room for improvement in that.
And I think you'd agree, you can fudge the numbers. People do it every day, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, there is, it's a bit of an art and science. It's like understanding that things like infiltration make a huge difference. So, you start to bump up that infiltration level a lot, and all of a sudden you can have a much larger piece of equipment.
This is that hammering you were talking about ahead of the show.
It is. So it's a new house, but it's still in progress a year later.
I think that our listeners will find that very comforting, that the engineer is working on his house a year later.
Well, I'm not doing the work. Someone else is. But yeah.
You did do a lot of the work, though, right? You're a hands-on guy. You love it.
I am. I'm a do-it-yourself person, which is really hard, when you're having someone else build your house and you think, I could be doing that work. And I cared a lot about the detail. The pandemic was very friendly to me in one way, in that I was in temporary housing and adjacent to where the house was getting built. There was less than a 5-minute ride away. Which, good news for me, bad news for the contractor.
For your contractor.
I was here every day.
That's cool, though.
I tried to be respectful, but I did supply all of the lighting, the HVAC, the plumbing, as well as design, because I cared deeply around the details. When you do like a finished basement and you're going to expose utilities, you got to be thoughtful around where you run the sanitary. If you run it in the wrong place, it's going to be in the middle of what you thought was going to be this kind of cool, interesting space. So that took a little extra work. We worked it out. But staying ahead of the contractors is tricky. You don't know quite what their schedule is going to look like. So much of the work we do professionally, so much of the value gets created in the integration, right? It's not like do the best engineering, do the best architecture. It's like, how do you do them together? That's the opportunity. Lighting, HVAC, architecture. They all need to work together. And so what we're good at is like doing that in such a way that it's like optimizing towards the final result. What happens as a residential scale, in my experience, is you have a lot less of that. So that I've got a job to do. I've got work to get done, and I'm going to get it done, whether you're ready for it or not, or whether it works for the electrician and the plumber. They're a little less concerned about that. Ultimately, I'm going to own it, so I care. So I provided a lot of the kind of the oversight in that regard regarding the integration.
How were you introduced to home building? Did you have people growing up who were handy around the house? Did you do that stuff when you were a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad built his own home. My dad, 50 years ago, bought a package, which he was always so proud of. He recently passed away, unfortunately, but he was so proud of the fact that he had built his own home. He went out and bought a package, which was like all the parts and pieces that would make a home, showed up in 2 tractor-trailer trucks, and he put it together. And he wasn't a formally trained carpenter, or he, much like me, was kind of a handyman. I learned from him. I always think it was amazing that he gave me full access to his tools and equipment, and I joke about it with my own sons because I would use hand saws and power tools, and I'd grab his equipment and I'd build. And that's what I did. And there was never any fear that, like, wow, is he going to hurt himself, or is that safe? And I just did it. These were real like power tools, and I joke with my own sons that are older now, but they would never go down into the basement and grab a power tool without talking to Dad first and getting instruction.
You and I had similar upbringing, seemingly, and I wonder where the grown-ups even were, but somehow we survived.
I took things apart. That's what I did, and then I put it back together again. It was bikes. It starts with kind of small things to bigger things, and watching my dad build that house, gave me a lot of exposure, and just, I think, the gift that he gave to me was that all things are possible, right? If you're committed and you want to figure it out, you can do it. Like, you don't need necessarily the help. You can fix it, you can build it, you can do it. And so I never really kind of felt like, wow, that's not possible. You should get a professional for that. It's unfortunate. I think about my dad, and he didn't have access to, or he wasn't a person that used the technology. So, where we can go into YouTube and get virtually instructions on how to fix anything. His way was, if the breaker trips, that's not wired right. I need to fix something right. And that's how it worked.
Did you have, Popular Mechanics and
We
the
did.
other kind of those, trade
Yeah,
magazines around the house?
all
Yeah.
the magazines. It's funny because I'm going through his house now and preparing for sale and cleaning it out. And one of the heavier things that's been stored in the attic is these boxes of Popular Mechanics. I don't even know what all the other magazines are, but I mean, they're all up there.
I don't know what you're going to do with those, man. It's kind of a treasure, but it's
It
also
really
like
is.
probably gross too.
They're heavy.
What do you think the commercial and institutional world where you live can teach the residential side of things? I'm sure like schedule and precision and everything is probably really well thought out. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
No, I think there is another level, which is, I don't know that you need the full level of sophistication that we bring to something like a hospital or, and the way we integrate our work. But I can see the real opportunity that I see is in this integration, right? It's like in working together, it's the shift from my work to our work, and what that looks like for the various trades. What I see is a lot of out of sequence kind of work and just not thoughtful around impact on each other regarding kind of how this is going to work with that. So there's a level of integration that I felt like for this house, I mean, I was able to provide that, but I can't help but think in other houses that I've seen built, it's like if there was just another kind of level of sophistication that was brought to bear regarding how it's going to work together. It's amazing how I think that would improve the quality, the efficiency, reduce costs. It's all there to be had, but people are so focused on like, how do I get this done fastest? How do I be more efficient? How do I get in and out? And the sequencing of the work would be the thing for me. And then maybe also a bit more sophistication regarding take advantage of tools. We have access to amazing tools, digital technology. I thought, hey, I used that for this house. I did virtual imagery. I mean, I could walk around the house in 3 dimensions. I could walk through the house in 3 dimensions. I could see exactly what it was going to look like long before it was built. And so I made adjustments around that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So, and that can happen very quickly. I mean, it's not a real big investment, I think, but with just another level of sophistication, there's a lot you can do.
is that, a job site meeting? Is it a Zoom call? Is it better plans? What would be the solution to that lack of
Um,
integration?
yeah, I think those are ways it can happen. I think there's actually a job there. I think I mean, that's largely the project manager or the general contractor or whoever it might be. But I think if they can kind of sharpen their skills a bit and add to that, I think they would be that much more effective. And I think it can be done in any one of those ways you talked about. Largely, it's just being thoughtful. It's like having a good plan, having a bit more documentation. The plans I did for the HVAC contractor, it made his life easy. He was grateful in the end. I mean, as nervous as he might have been, as much as I cared about the details, in the end, he said, "This is one of the easier jobs I've worked on," because he knew exactly what I wanted. I laid it all out. All the sizing was there. He didn't even have to think about it. There was no like, oh, me showing up and say, oh, I didn't expect that was going to go that way. We need to think about changing it. That didn't happen. So just being a little more thoughtful around, the pre-work, he was in and out, and it made for an easy job for him. Similarly with the lighting, I had laid out all the lighting. I had laid out all the way the switches were going to work. I did a kind of a high-end lighting control package, but I had it all laid out, and I didn't tell them where to run the wire, but I knew exactly where the switches would go and what they were going to control, and they just came in and did it, and they were done.
One of the things it sounds like is you need to have the questions answered ahead of time, right? Like, what do you want? Where's it going to go?
Well, I think for so many people, they show up, they're in the construction process, and this is the big issue for I think for many contractors is, the people show up and they had something in their minds around what it was going to look like, and then they get surprised. Like, oh, this room's not as big as I thought it was going to be, or where's the closet, or, or I thought there was going to be a switch, or whatever that might be. And then you've got all this kind of rework that needs to happen. And yeah, to go through those things beforehand, avoiding rework, I think, is like a big, big opportunity.
It's so demoralizing at a minimum. Doing stuff twice is a killer.
I mean, I saw it here as well. I mean, where it just got out of sequence because we started to see the pandemic impact in the construction, the last half of the construction. It didn't really slow us down as far as materials. We had most of those things were taken care of at that point. But, there started to be a bit of more of a shortage around getting access to people because some of the people were staying home. And then things start to get out of sequence. And then you start to see, like, they shouldn't be finished painting that room yet. It's not ready.
Yeah.
And they go ahead and do it. And then I get to repaint it again.
That drives me bananas, man. Like, it's hard.
Me too, because as a do-it-yourself person, you plan these things out very carefully because you don't want to be reworking because you're going to feel the frustration and the excess time and the cost. So when I watch someone else do it, I mean, I don't care that they own it and they're going to do it. I care that, like, I don't want them having to rework. If they can get it done once, and it doesn't improve the quality.
Never. Do you think the renewed interest in indoor air quality because of the COVID-19 outbreak will stick around? Do you think our indoor air is safe generally?
I do think that's a trend. I definitely paid attention to it here. I put an HRV in because I knew it's like we need to have a good level of ventilation and fresh air. I mean, that's something I place emphasis on. It's in the work that we do. We really understand that. I mean, how important it is in an industrial or healthcare setting. For homes too, I believe, homes are getting tighter. They need to have controlled ventilation. I mean, loose homes with high infiltration, I mean, you just had plenty of ventilation before, but it's not really in a controlled way. I think, many houses, the code officials will have them run the bathroom fan, right? I mean, the fan just runs. That drives me crazy. There's no switch for the fan. It's like it's just on all the time. That's not a great way to kind of solve a problem. There's opportunities within that to do much better that are not, it's choices. Where do people want to invest their money? And I think as people become more sensitive to the impact of air quality on their health and well-being, they're more open to investing a bit more in the equipment and the systems. Ultimately, I think they'll be happier for it. I think it's going to start to be expected, especially in newer construction.
Were there, you mentioned that it's a series of choices. Were there some things that you feel like you had to scale back on to have the HVAC system and ventilation system you wanted?
It's funny. This was our kind of forever home, and it's we think about it. It's a downsize from where we were, but it's not small. So it's we're at 2,400 square feet for two of us, which for most people is a very large home. For us, we're coming out of a larger home, so we did struggle with how small is small, and what should that look like, and it's trade-offs. It's a lot of trade-offs. Definitely first world problems for us. I mean, nothing to complain about. I mean, we're really pleased with what we built. I mean, we whether it's like custom cabinets, non-custom cabinets, various finishes, those kind of things. I mean, but I think generally we got most of what we wanted.
Did you go the whole 9 yards with landscaping and stuff too? Did you? Yeah.
Top to bottom. Yeah. So did a lot of research on things like hardwood floors. We wanted to use a wider plank. What kind of finishes? I mean, all of these kind of things. It's amazing how much effort you can put into a home. There's so many details.
Especially if you're an engineer.
And you care.
Right?
I know way more about this house than the builder does.
I think that's cool. Well, so would you do anything different with your new house if you had to do it again? Any mistakes you made?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I'm really happy with. I expected there to be more of that than there actually is. I would have to really think hard to imagine what those things are. We worked really hard. I mean, I feel like I lived in this house before I built it. I really do. I mean, virtually I did. I knew what it looked like. I had a computer model. I walked it. I knew every fixture that was going into the house. So basically, I feel like I almost lived here before living here. So it really wasn't a surprise to see it come together. And, it's kind of worked out. I fully expected there was going to be I knew I should put a light switch over there, but that really hasn't happened.
Well, that's to your credit. Good for you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Mark. Is there anything you want to ask or tell our listeners before we part company?
I would just say, I'm really grateful for the people that are out there kind of sharing their knowledge. One of the things I was able to take advantage of in building this house is just, there's so much great information online through podcasts and the materials that are being published. I'm always amazed by these people that are willing to take the time to document and share what they've learned with others. I'm curious around the motivation sometimes, as much as I enjoyed the effort of designing and participating in the building of this house. It's like I didn't document it all for someone else to learn from it so much. I'm happy to share it this way, but there are those people that are just, they really take it on themselves to kind of share in great detail what they've done, and that was so helpful in doing this home.
That was great.
Awesome. Yeah, that was fun.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Thanks to Mark for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody, and thanks again for listening.